Okay. Well, it turns out that I in fact lied to you when I said that the last video I made about Mass Effect was going to be my last. I decided to pick this DLC up mainly because I enjoyed the Leviathan thing and the intriguing sort of premise behind it in terms of finding out that or that the game that this DLC featured the first female Turian character ever in the Mass Effect universe. So that was pretty interesting in terms of me going into this and what I was expecting out of it. In this video, I'm gonna go over this DLC fairly briefly. I'll say it'll probably be a lot shorter. The duration that I'll be talking about the DLC and reviewing it compared to the last one because I don't have quite as much to say about this one. And then the remainder I'll just talk about like a couple points that I never got to from the Mass Effect 3 ending video. I know it's not exactly related to this, but I'm not going to make a whole another video about it. I just felt it's more efficient and useful to sort of blend that into this. But first, I'll just talk all about the DLC first. So basically, it takes place. You get a message in your message thing on your computer on the next to the galaxy map or in your personal cabin or whatnot. That Arya is like, oh, the operation's ready to go, and she wants to retake Omega because Omega is obviously the place you featured in Mass Effect 2, the first sort of new planet that you're exploring aside from the Citadel if you go there first. But Omega is like the whole nightlife kind of thing, and there's a lot of like metallic stuff going on there. It's sort of like a heavily industrialized place aside from like the whole sort of nightclub feel that Afterlife has to it. So I think the setting is pretty interesting. And that's what Omega is, and she wants to retake it because Cerberus troops have taken it back, and they're under the whole sort of planet. I guess you can really call it a planet. It's an asteroid, I think, and it's basically all over under control by this Russian Cerberus general named General Krovsky or something like. It was with a K. I don't remember the exact name of it. I know it's in the footage that I recorded for this. You talk to him, so it'll show you in the subtitles or whatever what his name is. I forgot it, but whatever. And you're basically tasked with whatever retaking it. And you go to the Citadel, and thankfully it was easier to find compared to the Leviathan DLC because it shows you I'll go to dock like D38 or whatever, and it like shows you when I go dock to the Citadel, it goes to it gives you the separate option of docking the normal thing. Then it says dock D38 or whatever. So I actually it didn't. I guess maybe that's because I learned from the first DLC, but it actually takes a lot. It's a lot quicker to load it up, and basically a lot of you basically get Arya there, and you infiltrate the system with her fleet. She has like a fairly large fleet, and you're trying to retake it. And there's a lot of shields. So there's a cool cutscene or whatnot of like a little bit of a battle scene with the ships, with her ships, and being gunned down and fighting and whatever. So that's pretty cool. The bulk of the DLC is basically combat. Aside from you with Arya, and then you meet this woman named Nylene, who's like an old acquaintance of Arya's, and then she sort of teams up with you on and off throughout the course of the DLC, and that's about it for the story of the DLC. I personally didn't find the story quite as interesting compared to the Leviathan thing, even though it didn't have like a relatively disappointing ending to it, unlike Leviathan. So that's definitely fine. I think the stronger points of the DLC is just that the combat is really good in terms of the level design. I thought the levels were pretty open. There's new enemies. It introduces you to two new enemies. One of them is like a Cerberus sort of super mech or something. It's not like those mechs that you fought in Mass Effect 2 because those were the really easy ones to take down. These are sort of like almost like full-fledged soldiers. They have like armoring and stuff like that. But they sort of fight kind of like the soldiers do, I think. And another addition is like there's this sort of, I don't know what the name of this is, but it's like some sort of huge monster like that Cerberus was experimenting on, because we already know that throughout the course of the series Cerberus is sort of notorious to the player for conducting all these inhuman, crazy, wild experiments, and the creature featured in the or the creatures, I should say, featured in the game. I mean, in this DLC, or sort of a prime example of that idea. And there's like you fight a few of them, and I mean I was playing on the lower difficulty settings, so they weren't very challenging. But I can imagine that they may cause players on the normal difficulties or higher a fair bit of trouble. And I liked how that sequence was designed because it felt like it was a horror thing, kind of. It actually, and that was a unique part about the DLC, where it's sort of like all dark. There's not a whole lot of lighting in the area, and there are like a lot of ramps and stuff. So I didn't know if it was gonna like pop out at once. And this is before you even know what it looks like. And I thought that was interesting. Well, the actual reveal part of it, where it comes out at you, is not like, I wish it was more unexpected. It would be more exciting that way. But the sort of feeling of going in there, like, unknown, something's gonna pop out at you, is a unique experience for Mass Effect, because it's un-Mass Effect like for that to happen, because Mass Effect is not a horror genre, so to speak. But I thought it was fairly refreshing in terms of actually being sort of scared and anticipating what's actually about to attack you, if the thing's going to attack you. So I thought that feeling of going in there like that was pretty refreshing. And anything else about combat is just the level design is a little bit open ended. Like, the environments generally are typically somewhat larger compared to the ones featured in like the Mass Effect 3 camp, or the main story. They're bigger, so you have more variety in terms of the combat and everything. I think there's like some new upgrades and stuff. Like, you could have like, I picked up a couple. There was like the shotgun lancer, or whatever you call it. It's the blade for your shotgun, so you can melee like better or whatever. I don't know what it's, or Omni Blade. That's what it's called. The Omni Blade for your shotgun. There's like 2 or 3 upgrades at least that you find throughout the course of it, and I think they gave you a new shotgun too, where you find one of those. That's about it in terms of upgrades. You have Arya in your squad now, so that's kind of cool, and she has some neat new abilities too, new biotic abilities that I don't think any of your other squad mates have in the game, or at all, like that they're newly featured in Mass Effect, which is kind of interesting. That's new too, and everything else was. That's all I really have to talk about, really. I thought the plot itself, well, nothing bad at all, nothing terrible. Just wasn't quite as compelling as the Leviathan DLC. Nothing terrible though. Good voice acting, and I liked the sort of relationship between Nylene and Arya. I thought that was the best part of the story, to be honest with you. Oh, and another good thing is that during this one part, it's sort of spoiler a little bit, but basically you make like a sort of difficult choice when you're trying to like Arya's trying to like cleanse a sort of defense virus so her troops can go in or whatever, and basically if you do that, it basically would either kill a lot of people if you do that, or you're trying to like reroute it and so it doesn't hurt the people. But then like her and the other woman, Nylene, are being like trapped and are holding off all these enemies, and they might die if you don't do it quick enough. So you have to make a difficult decision. That's what, and the general in hologram form is sort of like right next to you, urging you not to do that. And so it's sort of a difficult choice. I haven't bothered replaying it to see if I choose a different option, what would happen. Then I haven't done that yet. But I imagine, hopefully, that the outcome of that would be quite different, depending on what choice you make. Because you have like a few different options. Basically, you have it so you're attempting, by default, you're sort of attempting to reroute it anyway, and then you, like the renegade option or whatever, you have it like 3 different times. It might pop up, but you ignore it, you keep on doing it, and then Arya keeps complaining, whatever. So I think that was one of the best parts of the DLC in terms of actually providing player choice, and that's probably the only memorable part. And that was about it. You also have a renegade option in terms of like when you beat the general. I don't want to give away too many spoilers. I'm sorry if this is sort of spoiler intensive, but there's also a renegade option there. I didn't take that. I don't know if you were gonna punch the guy or whatever, but I think I've spoiled too much. But there's like another option there, but it's not necessarily heavily player choice based. It's more just combat stuff, really. That's the general gist of everything here. Is just the combat. like the level design and everything's really neat. But the DLC as a whole focuses almost entirely on combat, which, to be honest, isn't necessarily a bad thing considering how the focus of Mass Effect 3 is on the combat, because it's the best combat of the series. They polish it up and everything. That's what I have to give Mass Effect 3 credit for, despite how much I complain about all the missteps that they did in the game. The combat itself was actually really enjoyable in the game, and I think it's good that the DLC sort of focused on the best aspects, or the aspects that they focused on. So it shows that it's a high level of quality and enjoyment out of it. So that's basically my general review of it. I don't really have anything else to say about it. I think it's sort of interesting to fight through Omega again, and at the end of the mission, you actually get to go back into Afterlife again and have like a sort of battle scene there, and they actually sort of they redesigned it a little bit, which is sort of interesting. And I think it was interesting to see like the entrance to Afterlife, the place where you're used to exploring and stuff. I think that was interesting to see as a sort of war zone instead of because that's never happened before in Mass Effect. I mean, yes, technically in the game the Citadel was destroyed, but you weren't fighting in any of the places you normally explore, and I think that was an interesting concept. Even though it was sort of a small area, but that was interesting, and they redesigned parts of Afterlife. So there's like these little like booths and everything. There's like in the four corners. There's like new areas to explore a little bit there. So that was sort of interesting, even though it is during a fight, so you can't really explore it that much. But it's not. That was interesting. So overall, I definitely enjoyed the DLC. I think it's actually more expensive than the Leviathan DLC. And which one would I recommend? Well, like I said before, if you're really just sort of in the if you really enjoy the combat of the game, then I'd probably recommend it, because the whole DLC really exemplifies the combat aspect of the game. And that's obviously the strongest part. Probably the strongest part of the entire game is the combat and the gameplay. And this DLC really, supports that. It's sort of based around that. And if you enjoy the combat of the game, if that's what you play Mass Effect 3 for, then by all means go ahead and get it, because you'll probably enjoy it. And now in terms of more people like me, the original Mass Effect fans who weren't all that interested in the combat of the game necessarily, but wanted like the whole immersion experience, and put the story first before gameplay. And that's the internet. I'll get into that later, but basically, you probably will still enjoy it, even though the story is not necessarily all that compelling compared to some of the other things. The story is not that compelling, and you don't get to make that many big decisions at all. You only get to make like one or two, so that wasn't all that great. But it definitely has enough. Like, the plot's definitely interesting enough to keep you going, but it's not like all that gripping where you have to see what happens next or whatever. It's not like that. But I think either way, you'll probably enjoy it. Out of which one I recommend between this one or Leviathan, I would actually say the Leviathan DLC, in my personal opinion. Even though I disliked the ending to that DLC. It was relatively underwhelming. But I thought the journey to that point was a little bit more interesting, just because I'm more of a story type guy, and there's a little bit more mystery surrounding it, and it's a cheaper price, I think, by a few dollars. And I feel like the length of that DLC was actually very similar to this one, so I don't know. I would probably pick that one, even though I did enjoy this. So that's basically my review of the Mass Effect 3 Omega DLC. Out of a 10, I would probably say it's about an 8, like an 8 out of 10. And the Leviathan thing, I would say, was an 8.5 out of 10. And the only thing I disliked really about the Leviathan thing was the ending part of it, so that's why I shaved off 1.5. And for this, I would say I shaved off probably around 1 point or so for just the lack of a sort of interesting story, or the lack of a fantastic plot to it, and second of all, the lack of sort of big choices that you get to make. Yeah, that's basically about it. But like the other stuff is the positives is just that the combat and the level design and everything's a blast to play through. And that's basically my review of the DLC. And now I'll be talking about the ending. So if you don't want to view this part, then just stop watching this review at this point. All right, so I don't think this is going to be very long, but I just sort of forgot to mention a couple tiny things from my other Mass Effect video, or the one that I said was going to be the last one. So I just want to clarify a few things. First of all, just to reiterate a comment I said before in this review, I always thought that the first Mass Effect 2 game sort of actually put story and sort of the immersion experience ahead of gameplay and combat. I felt those two things were essentially in service of the story. I thought I could tell that the developers put this like the story part of it first, the story, the characters, everything, the whole plot, everything like that, the universe, that was ahead of the actual gameplay and like level design and everything like that. That was sort of exemplified the most out of any of the first two Mass Effect games, I should say, and to the point where like yeah, you just tell like even in Mass Effect 2 where the combat was sort of more exemplified, it was more modernized and stuff, and made more Gears of War-ian like or whatever. The story was still the prominent part of the game, and Mass Effect 3 essentially changed that, so it made it more like a mainstream game in the sense that the game play and game design part of it was like technically better, I should say, but the story part of it was sort of shoved aside. It was in service to the gameplay instead, and I personally didn't like that for the Mass Effect series. Now, in general, I would prefer it to be the opposite, but Mass Effect is just such a unique series that wasn't exactly the case. Now, my second point is actually pertaining to the ending of the game. Is just that a common thing that people sort of say in defense of the ending, or in sort of defense in one of the points that the fans complained about, is that how your choices should essentially affect the ending. Because they say that the choices that you made in Mass Effect 1 didn't affect the Mass Effect 1 ending. The choice you made in Mass Effect 2 didn't affect the Mass Effect 2 ending, so why should your choices affect the ending of the trilogy or whatever? Basically, I would agree to that to some extent in terms of the factual part of it and about whether your choices mattered in the previous games in terms of them impacting the ending. I would say, first of all, for Mass Effect, I could understand that. Like I said, I think I might have mentioned this. I know Ark and Gaia mentioned this. Basically, it's a coding nightmare to try and have multiple different outcomes from the very first game. If that's supposed to be a connector to the next two games, that's a coding nightmare to have to go through in terms of that. So, they're not going to have, like, for example, in the first Mass Effect, they're not going to have an option where Shepard dies, and then you're supposed to like load that save to the next Mass Effect 2 game, and then that continues, because that branches off. So that would branch off so much, and that'd be so much harder for them to do for Mass Effect 2 for that, because it's just a connector, because it serves as the first game. You could tell that there's going to be more games to that. I haven't gotten to the part where I'm actually arguing back. I'm just stating that that's why they would not, do that, because that'd be, a coding nightmare, to be honest with you. And it's unwise to really do that for the first game unless they're going to release like a game every 5 years and put like 5 years of development time into that, or 6 years or whatever. Because I remember the Kingdom Hearts games took like 4 years or 5 years instead of 2 years to do. So yeah, if they wanted to do that, then fine. But that's why that didn't happen, and I'm not complaining about that. But I don't think that's necessarily relevant to the Mass Effect 3. But let me go to Mass Effect 2. I would actually argue against what people are saying, because yes, like there's two different options. There's two different main options that could happen in Mass Effect 2, which theoretically would have had a large effect on what would happen in the start of Mass Effect 3. But unfortunately, what happens is, the one ending is that Shepard, technically there's four possibilities out of the, or 4 or 5 possibilities, I should say, for the Mass Effect 2 suicide mission or whatever. Basically, you could have an all-Paragon Shepard make all the good choices and do all the, the character side missions or loyalty missions or whatever, and get a good ending. or you could have an all Paragon and not do any of that, and then you have a bad ending where everyone dies. The other option is to be all renegade, but be an asshole or whatever, but you still get the good ending or whatever, and be an asshole and then you get the negative ending. And technically, all four of those endings aren't varied really in the sense that you either they can those four options can be the Paragon or Renegade aside. There's really only two options. Either everyone you survive, or like the mission accomplished if there's a couple deaths or whatever, with everyone saved, or a couple of people died or whatever. Mission accomplished. Shepard lives. You succeeded or whatever. And the second option, which I think is major in terms of impacting Mass Effect 3, is that Shepard dies and everyone dies. That's another option. You could have, like, I'm just going to use the two extremes here. Have Shepard live and everyone lives, or Shepard dies and everyone dies. Now, just imagine importing either one of those into Mass Effect 3. You could tell that there's going to be a huge ass difference in terms of what's going to be available to you in Mass Effect 3. Now, I feel the only reason that it's technically not true that it's diverse is because you can't actually import a dead Shepard into Mass Effect 3, because that'd be the writers writing themselves down into a hole for that, because then you'd have to find a way to bring Commander Shepard back from the dead again, and that wouldn't work. So I guess they got lazy there, and I guess to be honest, it's sort of that those two choices, the dead Shepard thing, came off as very irresponsible on their part. Now that upon reflection, now that I think about it, if they're not going to follow through on that, I think it's a shame that they didn't follow through on that, because I think that would have been very interesting, and that would have been an excellent example of how your story can sort of branch off, and that technically though. That would have been the very first part of the whole Mass Effect trilogy, I should say. That like your choice, your progressive choice throughout Mass Effect 2 could like drastically impact the core structure of a Mass Effect 3 story arc, if they actually, if they had decided to follow through on that, which they obviously didn't. So technically, the people are right in saying that your choice didn't really have a Mass Effect 2, an effect on the Mass Effect 2 ending, but strictly speaking, within Mass Effect 2 it did. Not when you take into consideration Mass Effect 3 it didn't, but that's sort of the developer's fault, and not what was actually in the game, if you know what I'm talking about here. Basically what I'm saying is, if putting Mass Effect 3 aside, it would have had a large impact. You would have thought it would have had a large impact to see everyone live and Shepard live, or everyone dies and Shepard died. You could just imagine what level of impact, in terms of the disparity of those two choices, and how they would affect your Mass Effect 3 playthrough. Before Mass Effect 3 came out, by the way. But just imagine that, and you'll understand where I'm coming from. And just imagine like what sort of possibilities were there. Like, oh, is Shepard gonna come back or whatever? Like the second one's really hard to imagine, but just imagine if they actually had followed through on that. That's what I'm talking about. Sort of like the what if part, but like it's just solely speaking within Mass Effect 2. It technically did have an effect on the ending or whatever, but whatever. My point being, tying this back to Mass Effect 3's ending, I feel like it should have been more of a Mass Effect 2 approach in terms of what you do throughout the game sort of affects what choice you do and how prepared you are. For example, that's what Mass Effect 2 was going for, because if you didn't do the loyalty missions, everyone was going to die, or like a lot of people were going to die no matter what. And I feel like they should have applied that to Mass Effect 3's ending in terms of, if you do all those side missions and collect a bunch of war assets, then maybe you get the best ending or whatever, And if you don't bother doing that or whatever, then you get a poor ending, or like not as good of an ending. That's the concept that they should have applied, and they didn't apply that to Mass Effect 3's ending, and that's what the fans are sort of angry about, I should say, because it didn't apply to the Mass Effect 3 ending, sort of like what it would have done to Mass Effect 2's ending if the developers had followed through on that. That's what I'm trying to say about that. Now, the final part I'll talk about is what choice I would have made. I never got a chance. I forgot to talk about that. Basically, as you probably saw, if you saw my other one, you saw that I picked the destroy option. And basically, here's what I'll say. I'll tell you what I would have picked after, or like initially, if I hadn't before realizing any of the outcomes of the options, just the first time if I experienced that ending, what I did pick. And afterwards, upon reflection, now that all this has happened, what do I think is the best option out of all that? Well, first of all, I picked the destroy option as as my first choice, because only I didn't have enough EMS or whatever to get the synthesis thing. And I felt because out of that and control, because I feel destroy is the most appropriate one to the entire story, and that's basically basically a tie between the destroy option and the destroy the whatever the refusal ending. Those two options are much more appropriate within the context of the story compared to control and compared to the synthesis ending or whatever. So I'm just going to say I'll rank this and basically say that the destroy option has always sort of been the premier. It's always been the focus. It's always been the point is to stop the Reapers, to destroy the Reapers, and that's all the games have been drilling into you for the past like 2.999 games or whatever. And that's basically one of the complaints I have about the ending, is that it substitutes that in with a whole new central conflict in terms of solving a sort of cultural battle between synthetics and organics that frankly hasn't really prominently existed at all throughout the series. And that was sort of a problem I had with the ending, but whatever, that's irrelevant. I would say that the destroy option would be the most appropriate without the extended cut or anything. That's the one I would have chosen because I felt it's the most appropriate out of the whole story. But even though it had the stupid repercussions of, like, killing the Geth or whatever, and like maybe even technically not the Quarians, that it didn't specify that. It didn't specify what was synthetic or what constituted as synthetic, whether it was someone with biotic implants or the Quarians or whatever, and it didn't specify whether it would like incinerate everything, the AIs or the synthetics, or it would just sort of disable them, or it didn't clarify that. And another thing that was weird is that Shepard shoots it or whatever, the tube, and I don't know how that would necessarily activate it, because usually if you shoot something it destroys it, and I don't know how that would necessarily trigger it. That's sort of a minor thing. The most important thing is Shepard continuously walks into an explosion and sort of has no care for his life anymore, and that's a huge lack of narrative coherence thing there, because no logical, rational person would do that. Even though he says he's half synthetic or whatever, you wouldn't actively commit suicide like that. It's against human instincts. It's against human nature to willingly walk into an explosion like that for no reason whatsoever. Those are the problems I sort of had with the destroy option. And then so for the control option, I feel like this is it's sort of the most contradicting the option out of those three. Basically because you're siding with the Illusive Man's ideas, just because he's always in favor of control, and basically just considering how his men are sort of resulting in Thane's death, and just the fact that you're actively fighting against him in Mass Effect 3, and you basically disagreed with him on everything leading up to that point from Mass Effect 2. And including the fact that you either shoot him or you force him to shoot himself, like 5 minutes before your choice is. It's illogical how any Shepard would choose that option, knowing that that's what the Illusive Man fought for, and just sort of say, "Oh, he was right after all. I shouldn't have killed him," or what. It was. I mean, I understand that the Illusive Man wanted to sort of use it for evil, but just sort of fighting for the same idea as him, I mean, it's just not. Is not appropriate for the story. Now, let me clarify this. All right, let me clarify what I mean by fighting for the same idea here. I'm saying that, like Saren from the first game, Shepard and Saren were actually fighting for the same thing. Essentially, they both thought what they were doing was right, technically, but they weren't they were fighting to preserve everyone, but they were just essentially using different methods to do that. But the Illusive Man was fighting for something else entirely compared to Shepard, because Shepard never indicated that he wanted to control it. the Reapers, and he always wanted to sort of stop or destroy the Reapers, and Illusive Man was so heavily favored towards the control option. Like I said before, in the Illusive Man's base, he says, our ideas are so disparate to coexist together or something. I can't remember the exact quote, and I feel like that'd be contradicting to their whole nature, the whole nature of the Illusive Man, because the Illusive Man is supposed to be the anti-Shepherd, essentially, the entire series. Aside from Saren, he's another anti-Shepherd, and it seems nonsensical as a story component to have Shepherd suddenly give in to the Illusive Man, the antagonist of the game, which is another thing they screwed up about Mass Effect 3, is they made the Illusive Man and Cerberus the antagonist instead of the Reapers, really, because they sort of downplayed the Reaper threat throughout the entire game, to the point where half the time I didn't even realize, I forget that the Reapers were even invading, or that there was even a war going on, to be honest with you. They didn't exemplify that enough throughout the entire game. Mostly because you only see the Reapers in a few different missions, to be honest with you, which is really annoying. Yeah, so I just didn't like that option at all. And then the synthesis option is the one that seems the most... Well, oh, sorry, let me just say that if the Illusive Man thing aside, the ending itself wasn't that terrible. It seems like a decent enough idea to want to control it under your control. Just my problem with it had to do with the story continuity and consistency. That's what my problem was with the control option. Now, I still would have picked that one over the synthesis option, and the synthesis option, I think, was the worst one because it was the most nonsensical bit in terms of how suddenly everyone's half metallic, or what that would do, and how the Reapers would not be under anyone's control, so, there's no guarantee that they would stop purging no matter what. This was obviously evidenced in the extended cut, though, that he said that they would stop or whatever, but I don't care. But whatever. And it was just so nonsensical how, I just didn't see how it was a good thing, how everyone would be half metallic, and it seems so outrageous and so space magic-y that it was just, it was just a terrible ending, I thought. It was not appropriate to the series, and essentially it was what the Catalyst thing indirectly recommended to you. So I was just, the Catalyst sways you that that's the best option, but I felt it was the worst option because it didn't make a whole lot of sense, to be honest with you. And second of all, I didn't think it was a good thing that everyone would be half metallic, because what if people didn't, like that at all? I don't know if people are a fan of altering their genes' DNA like that. And third of all, it wouldn't stop people from creating synthetics at all. It wouldn't stop that at all. People would still have the instinct to do that. That's why I didn't choose that option, and that was probably the worst option based on the original endings. Now, the extended cut endings. Basically, I would have probably chosen the refusal option if I known that was available. But basically, let me just say this, since my voice is, I'm starting to get a sore throat here a little bit. I'm just gonna say that basically, technically, after the extended cut, the synthesis option is technically the best one in terms of the outcome. I'm just gonna divide this into category. The best outcome, I would say, is synthesis, followed by control, followed by destroy, followed by refusal. The happiest outcome, I should say. Now, technically, in terms of Shepard's survival, if I'm rating the endings based on that, I would say the destroy option is the best, followed by control option, I guess, followed by refusal, and then by synthesis, I guess. Probably, yeah, because just, I don't know, because that's what I would say in terms of Shepard's survival, because the destroy option is the only one, actually, technically the refusal, but the destroy option is the only one where Shepard's still alive when the conflict is resolved, technically, and I guess I could just imagine that he gets back up and gets reunited with his crew. Even though he seemed badly injured, where he's barely taking a breath, I guess that's left up for the interpretation of the player, but I didn't like that very much, but you could just imagine that he gets his happy ending and gets, reunited with everyone. I don't care. I'll just imagine that. But basically, that's that. But I just felt that the synthesis options and the control options were just too artificial, because it just felt, so didn't feel genuine at all, because all the Reapers or whatever that suddenly have been harvesting everything. are now cooperating with the humans and everyone. It just felt so artificial and not. It felt contrived and artificial. It didn't rise naturally from the story. It just felt so forced. And I still didn't like it that much. That's the problem. Like all these, technically the endings are happy, but that's not necessarily what I was looking for here. I still don't feel like any of them, any of the four options are really that appropriate for the Mass Effect trilogy at all. The ones that are most appropriate, I would say, are Destroy and Refusal options are two more appropriate ones in terms of what Shepard should have done, and that's not talking about what kind of Shepard. I feel that's what those are the most appropriate ones. Feel free to technically disagree with me, but those are just my opinions about it. Those are what I would have chosen, even though Refusal option technically has the worst possible outcome, and I didn't feel like that was very satisfying. I feel like there should have been an option that sort of argues back against the catalyst. Really, like it's sort of. I wish there's all my plot. There's like I have like a list of like 100 damn plot holes just pertaining to like the catalyst, and I would have just liked to ask him, how all these things that just sort of disprove how horrible the ending, the core foundation and structure of the ending really is. So that's basically about it. I feel like just to reiterate, I feel like the extended cut was a step in the right direction in terms of being more complete, at least because it offered more closure. It offered more closure in the sense that you got to see what happened to the characters, even though it was a bit randomized. It isn't character specific, which I would have wanted. It didn't have like any text that shows you what happens. I mean, it is. I would say it's a complete ending now. That's what the extended cut really did. It felt better. I mean, it was a lot better compared to the original endings, but the core foundations or the core problems that plagued the original ending are still there in some form of another. Some of them being more prominent than others, but they're still there. And I feel like the endings are still broken to a large extent. Or at least very in need of a drastic overhauls towards good portions of it, aside from just the catalyst part, because the whole catalyst part just sort of ruins everything. Like the other sections, like the stuff going into the beam and then the Anderson stuff is definitely workable, but everything involving the catalyst is just terrible. Yeah, but the good news, just on a final note. They're releasing, I think, a Mass Effect movie in the next couple years, I think, and that might be a good opportunity. That could either be a really good thing or a really terrible thing, because technically that could be. I'm just gonna say the positive side here, in that if BioWare or whatever, because since technically it's still their work, they realize that everyone hates the ending. It's their second chance to really craft a new ending that's actually appropriate towards the series. It's their second chance, so that means that the Mass Effect trilogy gets the ending that it actually deserves, similar to how the Dark Knight trilogy, the Dark Knight Rises conclusion was. I felt that was a perfect conclusion basically to that trilogy, and the argument that what is it that the Mass Effect trilogy, like the conflict is too dark to have a happy ending, I disagree with that entirely. Just based on the Dark Knight series, I mean, the Dark Knight is such a dark Batman. The Nolan's Batman movies are really dark especially the last two of them, and yet he still has a happy ending. But there's a lot of loss and suffering throughout the course of that series. That's all those emotions have sort of been earned the hard way. Whatever this ending was supposed to evoke out of you has already been earned throughout the course of the series. And his conflict has been very dark. His best friend Rachel died. Harvey Dent died. Well, like a lot of these, like the commissioners and mayors died. So there's a lot of sacrifice and death and stuff in that series, and a lot of it was very dark. And yet he still got a happy ending. And I feel overall it's argued that I would argue that series as a whole is a lot darker than Mass Effect. I mean, despite the devastating conflict that Mass Effect is all about in terms of the Reaper War, it's still not as dark, I don't think, because Mass Effect has a lot more humor and it has a lot more heart to it compared to the Dark Knight trilogy. So it's not nearly as dark. Yet that series is happy ending. So this one, which is fairly lighter compared to that, It's just it didn't. So I mean, there's no argument there. I mean, that's where I would sort of whatever. And but anyway, the negative thing is that they would reiterate this ending into the theaters, and it would get the same reaction. But this is elevated on a public level, so like the same amount of people who hated the ending, like, and then like to the square root of like, or sorry, square it or cube it or whatever, quadruple it or whatever, like that number, multiplied by 10 some, like that's going to be the reaction to that. And I would, if that happens, I'm going to be refusing. I'm going to refuse to see a Mass Effect 3 movie if they decide to release it. If they don't decide to own up on their errors and actually craft a proper fucking ending to this trilogy, that might be the second chance that we deserve, like the ending that the series deserves. We might have to wait for that. That might be their second chance. They fuck up the video game version of it. Maybe they can get the movie version of it right. Who knows? That I'm hopeful for. If they do, then I'll forgive them. Perhaps if they do that, but as of now, I don't. It could be their big second chance to actually fix the stuff that's plagues Mass Effect 3's ending and craft a new one. And just don't even get me started on artistic integrity again. That would be artistic integrity, is actually fixing the problems with it. If you're given another opportunity to do that, that's what I consider it. What I consider artistic integrity is actually caring about your work, caring about how your work is received, and actually trying your hardest to find ways to improve that. And obviously, I've already given them a shitload of ways to improve it. Or a lot of things that need to be improved. Yeah, so that's end of my little rant. If you stuck this out, you'll probably be feeling my pain about this. But yeah, this is gonna be my last Mass Effect 3 video, unless there's gonna be another DLC coming out. Other than that, peace out. I'll be doing my Halo 4 and Call of Duty Black Ops reviews sometime in the next few weeks, hopefully. I haven't played Assassin's Creed 3 yet or Resident Evil 6, but I'll probably get those, I'll play those around Christmas time in a few weeks, and I'll get those reviews out eventually. But here's hoping that Grand Theft Auto 5 will be an excellent game, and I won't be disappointed by that game. It'll be epic and fantastic, and that's gonna be my most looking forward to game within the next 6 months. So goodbye. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and see you guys later. Take care.